Have you ever heard of the mysterious story of the dispute between the Archangel Michael and Satan over the body of Moses? This story, recorded in the book of Jude, verse 9, is not only intriguing, but also full of profound lessons that can transform our understanding of power, divine protection, and Satan's wiles. What was at stake in this dispute? Why was Moses' body so important, and what was God protecting by hiding it? Moses was one of the greatest leaders in biblical history, known for leading the Israelites to freedom, mediating the Ten Commandments, and guiding his people towards the Promised Land. His life was marked by extraordinary encounters with God, great miracles, and immense challenges. However, even he faced moments of weakness that had significant consequences. God, in his infinite wisdom, decided that Moses would not enter the Promised Land because of a critical error. Instead of talking to the rock so that water would come out of it, as God commanded, Moses struck it in a moment of anger. This seemingly small action represented a failure to give glory to God and trust in his word. After his death, described in Deuteronomy 34, the Bible reveals something unique. God buried Moses himself in an unknown place, and no one knows where he is to this day. This divine decision raises many questions. Why did God hide Moses' body? And why was Satan so interested in him that he got into a dispute with the Archangel Michael? What we do know is that this heavenly battle was not a simple narrative event, but a spiritual clash that carries deep meanings. Satan, called the accuser in Revelation 12 verse 10, had his own intentions for Moses' body. He might have planned to use it as an object of idolatry, inciting the Israelites to turn away from their faith in God, as they had already done with the golden calf in the desert. Imagine the impact this would have had on a people who often struggled with idolatry. God, in his wisdom, intervened to prevent Satan from using Moses' body as a tool for his evil plans. And in this story, we see Michael, the mighty archangel, confronting Satan in the name of the Lord. But what is most striking is that Michael, even with all his heavenly authority, did not dare to rebuke Satan on his own. Instead, he said, "The Lord rebuke you." This teaches us that true power belongs to God, and it is in him that we must rely when facing evil. The dispute over Moses' body is a clear reminder that Satan is always looking for ways to distort God's purpose and divert people from true worship. However, it is also a testimony to God's divine protection and commitment to protecting his people from falling into spiritual traps. And this story, full of mysteries and lessons, continues to impact us, inviting us to reflect on our own journey of faith. Moses' life has always been surrounded by profound meanings, and the dispute over his body after death reveals something that transcends the physical. Satan, cunning as ever, had clear intentions of using that body as an instrument for his own purposes. But why exactly did he want Moses' body? What did he intend to do? One of the reasons most discussed by scholars is the possibility that Satan wanted to turn Moses' body into an object of idolatrous veneration. Throughout their journey in the desert, the Israelites had already shown a dangerous tendency towards idolatry. The case of the golden calf is a classic example. Now imagine if the body of Moses, such a respected and admired leader, was put on display or turned into an icon. This could completely divert the focus of God's people, leading them to worship Moses instead of recognizing the Lord as the true source of leadership and salvation. God, in his wisdom, knew that hiding Moses' body would be the best way to protect the Israelites from yet another spiritual deviation. Satan, however, was determined to thwart this plan. He probably hoped to use Moses' body to manipulate the hearts and minds of the Israelites, turning him into a symbol of something God never intended. In addition, Satan has always been described as the accuser. He could be interested in Moses' body to bring up his past mistakes, such as the murder of the Egyptian or the breaking of the tablets of the law in a moment of rage. He could use these events to discredit Moses before God and his people, trying to tarnish the memory of a man who, despite his human failings, was a faithful and chosen servant of God. But there is another aspect to this story that cannot be ignored. Moses' appearance next to Elijah on the Mount of Transfiguration, next to Jesus, recorded in Matthew 17 verse 3, points to the fact that God had bigger plans for Moses. He not only preserved his body, but also elevated him to a position of heavenly honor. This shows us that despite Moses' faults and moments of weakness, God sees beyond mistakes and is always willing to redeem and honor those who remain faithful to him. And then we have the lesson of the Archangel Michael. Despite his position of power and authority, Michael did not confront Satan on the basis of his own strength. He didn't try to win the dispute on his own. Instead, he called on the name of the Lord, saying, "The Lord rebuke you." This attitude reflects an impressive humility and teaches us that no matter how strong or capable we may be, our true strength comes from God. When we look at this story, we can clearly see the contrast between Satan's cunning and divine wisdom. Satan always looks for ways to cause destruction, division, and confusion, but God, with his infinite wisdom, always has a greater plan. God's decision to hide Moses' body was not only an act of protection, but also a reminder that he is always in control, even when circumstances seem mysterious or difficult to understand. This story leads us to reflect on our own faith. Are we allowing material things or circumstances to take us away from God? Are we putting our trust in objects, leaders, or human achievements, instead of fully trusting in the Lord? Just as God protected the people of Israel by hiding Moses' body, he also calls us to redirect our focus to him, the source of all true worship and purpose. Now that we understand the depth of this conflict, there is still more to consider about what it teaches us about our relationship with God and our resistance to Satan's strategies. While the dispute over Moses' body reveals spiritual conflicts invisible to the human eye, it also invites us to reflect on the importance of faithfulness to God in a world full of distractions and temptations. The battle between the Archangel Michael and Satan was not only a question of heavenly power, but also a lesson in how we should deal with the temptations and accusations we face on our own journey of faith. Moses, despite being an exceptional leader, also had his moments of weakness. He failed to enter the Promised Land because of a significant mistake, a moment of disobedience that served as a warning to us all. God instructed him to speak to the rock so that water would flow out, but, overcome by pressure and frustration with the people of Israel, he chose to strike the rock. This act seems small, but it revealed a critical deviation. Moses attributed to himself and Aaron the power to perform the miracle, instead of glorifying God. This episode demonstrates that even the greatest spiritual leaders are susceptible to error, reminding us that our dependence on God must be constant. Moses suffered the consequences of his choice, but God, in his mercy, still honored him, showing that God's plans go beyond our failures. Returning to the dispute over Moses' body, the Archangel Michael's stance toward Satan is a powerful example of how we should confront evil. Instead of trying to argue or fight Satan directly, Michael turned to God's authority, declaring, "The Lord rebuke you." This teaches us that, in our spiritual battles, we don't need to rely on our own strength or wisdom, but must lean on God's power. This dependence on God is crucial, because Satan, as the accuser, is constantly looking for ways to condemn us and lead us astray. He knows how to exploit our shortcomings, just as he could have used Moses' mistakes to discredit his leadership and sow doubt among the people of Israel. However, God's grace is greater than any accusation. Even in the face of our failures, God sees our hearts and continues to work in our lives, redeeming us and using us for his purposes. Furthermore, Satan's desire to possess Moses' body reveals his manipulative nature. If he had succeeded in using Moses' body as an object of idolatry, this could have caused a huge spiritual setback for the Israelites. God knew this and, in his wisdom, buried Moses in a secret place. This act reminds us that God is always protecting his people, even when we don't fully understand his actions. It's important to reflect on how this story applies to our daily lives. Satan keeps looking for ways to distract us and divert us from the true worship of God. He uses people, objects, and even our own weaknesses to try to draw us away. But just as God protected the Israelites by hiding Moses' body, he also offers us protection and guidance to remain steadfast in our faith. This divine protection, however, requires us to trust God and follow his lead. Just as the people of Israel needed to learn to depend on God instead of idols or human leaders, we are also called to put our trust completely in the Lord. We must not rely on our own strength or material things, but on God, who is the source of all wisdom and power. There is still much more to be gleaned from this story, and every detail points to God's sovereignty over all things. Moses was a powerful instrument in God's hands, and his life continues to be a source of inspiration and valuable lessons for us all. The dispute over Moses' body is just one of many examples of how God works to protect and guide his people, even in the face of Satan's plots. As we come to the end of this story, we are invited to reflect on its deeper impact. Moses' life and death, as well as the mysterious dispute over his body, remind us that God is always in control, even in situations that seem incomprehensible. This story teaches us not only about the invisible spiritual battle, but also about our own journey of faith and God's role in our protection and redemption. One of the most remarkable aspects of Moses' life is how God continually showed his mercy, even when he failed. Although Moses did not enter the Promised Land, God allowed him to gaze upon it from the top of Mount Nebo. This vision was a gift from God, a reminder that although we may face the consequences of our choices, his grace remains with us. Later, Moses appears next to Elijah on the Mount of Transfiguration, talking to Jesus. This reaffirms that, despite his failings, Moses remained in communion with God and played a vital role in the plan of redemption. The contest between Michael and Satan also teaches us about humility and dependence on God in our own spiritual battles. Instead of confronting Satan with his own strength, Michael appealed to God's authority, showing us that God's power is supreme in all circumstances. This reminds us that we don't have to fight alone. When we face temptations, accusations, or challenges, we can draw on God's strength, knowing that He is faithful to sustain us. This story reminds us that God is always one step ahead of Satan. Although the enemy is cunning and persistent, he can never overcome God's wisdom and power. God's plan for Moses and the people of Israel remained intact, and He continues to protect and guide those who trust in Him. Moses' legacy is a testimony to what God can do through people who are imperfect but willing to obey Him. Moses was called to an extraordinary mission, and despite his flaws, he fulfilled his purpose as a leader, prophet, and intercessor. His life challenges us to trust God, even when we face our own weaknesses and challenges. Finally, the dispute over Moses' body points us to a greater truth: God is sovereign over life and death. He has absolute control, even in the most mysterious and difficult moments. This story invites us to trust in God's wisdom, knowing that He always acts for our good, even when we can't understand His actions. And as we reflect on this powerful narrative, we are reminded that our true worship should be directed to God alone. Just as God protected the people of Israel from potential idolatry, He also calls us to keep our focus on Him, rejecting the distractions and temptations that could draw us away from His presence. May the story of Moses and the mysterious dispute over his body inspire you to trust in God's wisdom, to depend on His strength in your battles, and to always seek His will. Remember that, just as God was present with Moses, He is with you on every step of your spiritual journey. Now, if this video was uplifting for you, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. And if you want to continue reflecting on powerful stories from the Bible, there's already an upcoming video on the screen waiting for you. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.